and welcome to Risk Chats with the Firm. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today we have another great collaborative podcast between AGA and AFERM. We're going to be talking about the ERM report that came out from at AGA based on the AGA AFERM ERM summit held last year, and we'll also be talking about the summit that's coming up this year. So let's all get excited about that and listen in to this podcast and see what we learned. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today we are going to be speaking about a couple things. So there was an AGA AFERM joint ERM workshop back in early last year, and there's one coming up in April of this year. So we wanted to get together with some of our friends here to talk about some of the results of the last one and the white paper that was written on that, and also to get into some things happening in the new one. So why don't we go around the table, and of course we've got Tal over here.
Good morning, this is Tal, and I bet Paul's going to be sure to actually post the link to the white paper next to the link so you guys can open it up and flip through it while you're listening.
That's right. How about Bert?
This is Bert Neuhring. I'm a partner with Crow.
This is Thomas Holland. I'm a manager with Guidehouse.
And Sarah Choi, a manager with Guidehouse.
Okay. And we say regrets Marianne Roth wanted to join us today, but she wasn't able to make it, so we're going to give her her own podcast, hopefully. So we'll give her a call and see if we can do that. So why don't we jump into it? Maybe, Thomas, can you give us a little overview about what the workshop was all about? Yeah, let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah, so this is an annual workshop that the Association of Government Accountants and the Association for Federal Enterprise Risk Management put on together. This last one, which is the one that the report was written about, was the third one. The fourth annual workshop is actually scheduled for this April 29th, so definitely encourage people to register for that. We call it a workshop, and that's really exactly what it is. When these two groups came together to start planning the first one, we didn't know what it was going to look like, but we did know one thing. We'd been both hearing from our members that they wanted more on ERM, but specifically they wanted more practical examples rather than conceptual lectures.
Right.
So the way we decided to structure the workshop is really built around that request from the community. We came up with 3 topics, and we try to get as specific as possible on those topics based on what we're hearing at that time from our members and everything. And we have presentations from experts on the topic, but then we follow the presentations with facilitated small group discussions and exercises at each of the table where the participants share their thoughts, the takeaways from the presentations. Sometimes they even go through an exercise. And so they share examples of what they've been able to do at their agency based on the topic or what they hope to be able to do. And there's a designated note taker at each table. So we then use these notes to produce the final report. So ultimately, the participants walk away not just with a better understanding of what's taking place at other agencies on the topic, but they also have that report to refer back to.
All right, Thomas, I'm already interested. You say I have to register. Who do you want to register, and how would they do that?
Yeah, so it's really not only geared towards ERM practitioners, it's also others that are interested in risk management or just interested in learning more about enterprise risk management. So it's really open to anyone, and you can do that at either the AFERM website or the AGA website.
Thanks.
Actually, now are these government only, or everybody's able to join?
Anybody, I should clarify that. So actually, it's government only, but there is sponsors typically, so if you sponsor the event, you can send 2 people, and then those sponsors are the ones that actually get to facilitate the small group discussions.
Very good. So maybe we'll go through this whole thing first, and then we'll sort of talk about the one coming up. How about that at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 3 sessions, and we're going to talk about each one. So I just want to give you sort of the titles of what they were. The first one was about cyber. So basically, how can we add value beyond implementing ERM? How does ERM intersect with cyber risks? And the second one was a little bit about A123 Appendix A, going beyond the financial statements. And the third one was about the organizational culture, some of the risk elements around that. So actually, I'm going to start here with Bert to kind of kick us off with the cyber risks. So again, with the white paper you guys put together and the discussions in the room, what did you all hear about the benefits of kind of managing cybersecurity through ERM? What are the ways that some of these organizations out there could integrate cyber into their management?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So what we learned from the speaker was that ERM can help ensure cyber risks are translated and communicated to each tier of the organization. And translation of the risk going up to upper management is as vital as the translation of the required response of to the risk at other levels of the organization. So if management can understand the risk through effective translation of the risk terminology and cost benefit, for instance, then decisions can be made to better manage those risks. For instance, how does an organization budget to incorporate controls to respond to or mitigate a certain risk? Mm-hmm. Effective communication of the risk will also help reach all of those involved with the risk response throughout the agency to appropriately respond to those particular risks. So an ERM framework can effectively provide the structure to manage the cyber risks through the capture and evaluation of the risks and determining the appropriate responses. Then those risks can be evaluated throughout the agency to determine the financial, operation, or reputation impact on those particular risks, and to develop then a comprehensive approach to cyber risk management.
So it's not like pretty much everybody, cyber's in their list of risks. I mean, that's
right
across the government at this point.
Right.
And Bert, I know anytime you walk in the CIO office and they whip out 853, 837 risk management framework, saying we've been managing risks in CIO's office,
for a while,
15 years before you guys ever pulled out an ERM. We've got lots of risks. In the workshop or in the discussions, how does the existing CIOs established risk management processes tie into the A123 structures?
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect, as you mentioned, Tal, that the ERM framework is newer to the management and monitoring of the cyber risk, and so I think it's important for the agency CIO to work closely with the CRO or that community to make sure that they are communicating those, and it's important that the communication be in terminology that everyone understands, and oftentimes that creates a barrier that causes confusion around how to respond appropriately to cyber risks.
I've even heard just the word risk management. People get confused by that. It's like, we do something called risk management. We do something called continuous monitoring. It's totally different from what you're talking about. So yeah, they get that taxonomy down, across the organization.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of challenges, what were some of the other challenges you guys talked about there?
So as we broke into table discussions at the session, there were a couple key challenges. First off, quantification of the business impact of the cybersecurity events, including awareness of the threats within the organization by agency leadership as well as by staff within the agency, and then determining what is the effective response to manage those particular risks. There's also a disconnect between the terminology used, as we just talked about, between the cybersecurity professionals as well as other agency personnel. And so if we can quantify the risk, we can help determine the remediation steps that are necessary to address those risks, and including understanding that cost-benefit relationship. But quantification of the risk can be very difficult and challenging because of the constant threats and the changes to those threats on a regular basis. And so it's important then for that information to be provided to everyone within the organization in an understandable manner. And so, as agency leaders need to develop what appropriate tools that are needed to manage those risks, and then the understanding of the personnel of the agency to recognize when they're threatened by various cyber type risks. And so the table discussion really then centered around how do we address that, and communication and education we found to be some of the more key elements of managing that risk. And they felt that training is critical and that the training today sometimes lacks the emphasis on everyone's responsibility within the agency to manage cybersecurity risks. And so the desire was for more hands-on training and instructions to everyone to understand the dangerous aspects of cyber risks.
So, I don't know if you remember the answer to this, and, I won't put you on the spot, but, you talked about the difficulty in quantification. Did you hear any suggestions about that, or did that discussion reach a conclusion?
I think with regards to the quantification, it really is around, getting back to having an ERM program can help gather all of those types of risk that an agency faces. So getting systems in place through an ERM process can help gather what you're hearing, what kind of threat is out there, and then you can share that across the community, and the CIO then can evaluate that as to how do we respond to that and how like certain threats might be to each other, and really address those in a consistent manner and in an agency-wide manner.
Yeah, and we've had several podcasts about cyber because it's such a hot topic, and I think a lot of folks, they don't quantify it till it happens, and then they know how much it costs because they had to pay a ransom or they had to do whatever, so it's one of those hard to quantify, but then it happens and it's like, I wish I would have done that before.
Right, and as more information is available, as you experience this, and I think through an ERM program, as you gather that and track those risks, you can then better respond, and you can better quantify what's coming.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we jump into session number 2? I think Sarah's going to help us out here. So again, the topic was A123, Appendix A, and kind of going beyond the financial statements, or what can you do in addition to that. So I think one of the first topics here you guys talked about, there was a revised circular back in 2018 at this point. Based on some of the changes that were in there, how did agencies want to start tackling these revised requirements?
Yeah, sure. So this conversation got very interesting, and hopefully this can be some inspiration for some agencies to be more tactical about how they approach adhering to the new requirements. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go through a list here, but so some of the things that folks talked about were using ERM practices to review and refresh risk rankings to identify areas that might be over-controlled and do not need as much focus. So they can start taking some of those resources and looking at areas that are less controlled. Mm-hmm. Agencies are also asking why certain things are being tested. There's been a sort of a cadence where just keep doing it because you did it last year and the year before and 10 years before that. And so now they're asking themselves, why are they doing it, and taking an ERM perspective and considering residual risk as they think about what areas need to be tested. Some are conducting reviews not every year, but going to every other year, and some are even going to every 3 years for certain areas, process areas.
Right.
There are folks that are scaling back compliance exercises.
That's interesting.
Not saying they're not going to meet it, but it just goes to the whole idea of maybe some things are over-controlled.
Yeah, the risk-based approach, regardless, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. So they're scaling back control testing. They're and as part of that too, some agencies are taking away from maybe the financial control testing and looking at programmatic and entity level controls. This is an area that across government seems to be an opportunity. Right. And so they're just moving resources around now. And let's see, some other areas include acknowledging the need to move away from compliance focused activities and using data analytics. So a lot of it's very similar here, but using other sets of information that might already be in the agency to figure out where they can kind of move around their resources, since a lot of agencies are not getting any extra resources to do new to adhere to new requirements.
So, Tal, I know pretty much everybody in this room, I'm sure, has worked on A123 assessments and work. I mean, how are you guys, some places you've been, how are you guys incorporating the ERM approach or starting to look at non-financial processes, and, how's it affected your A123 program? Yeah, you, Tal.
Well, one of the first things that come off is with the FRIDA, which
fraud
requires
reduction.
requires us to have a integrated agency-wide perspective about identifying and monitoring and using data to monitor those related fraud risks. First thing we did is we went through all the existing control evaluations where when you're going through your objectives on the process, especially in financial, and identifying those areas where there were control gaps or weak controls that were related to fraud. And then we started there, putting that together in an agency-wide risk register prior then to going out to the programs and getting the more difficult ones that is kind of like family business discussions of corruption. How could management be corrupt, and what would their incentives be, and where is the greatest opportunity and incentives and culture-wise within our agency, or where, and then going from there into the misappropriate of assets. And so that was the first one, because the internal control portion had already done all the foundational legwork, so we could then leverage that and then bring that into that fraud risk. So that's one that immediately pops to mind.
Yeah, because and you guys are looking at, traditionally A123 looks at the financial processes, obviously, but starting to look at other reporting activities too, right?
Like with the I-Core, which is part of the
Yeah.
new appendix what comes out, where you take a list of your major external reports and you do a materiality assessment of which ones are the most important, and then basically doing the exact same cycle of recognizing, recording, summarizing, and reporting. What are the controls in place in each piece of that cycle for that kind of programmatic data that's not financial yet is relied upon by external readers?
Yeah, well, it sounds like from the workshop that's what agencies are talking about, taking that ERM mindset and applying it now to how you do these reviews. So why don't we? I think there's another area too you guys talked about. It was kind of the workforce. How would the workforce need to change a little bit here?
So this is more forward thinking, and some of the conversations were around how can we better leverage ERM practitioners. And so a lot of the participants talked about how a lot of agency ERM practitioners are basically like business consultants within the agency. And so leveraging them for work around controls, having them assist them in mapping the controls to agency strategic plans, and a lot of ERM practitioners have a lot of good perspective all across the agency. So to bring sort of that business unit to business unit perspective, cross-cutting, I think that there was a sort of a coming together of minds of having to use those resources in-house more going forward. Another thing that came up is about the increasing play of technology. Some agencies are already exploring blockchain and other intelligent automation, like RPA, robotic process automation. So it's looking at a workforce that are skilled in this space, and so it does require meaning like perhaps you need to bring some of those folks in house. But going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of cybersecurity, it's training, right? Bringing the right training to agency staff about technology. Other things include controls and ERM domains that complement data science and data analytics, and so there's this shift that needs to happen, and that agencies need to start planning for that now.
Sarah, if you went and opened up the report, which you'll find on a link that Paul's going to provide, how does the presentation provide the summary? What does it offer on this session?
we had we had some guest speakers that spoke. So there's a little summary about that, about
Right.
the insight that was provided there. But it's the discussion that was had about.
But there's a series of bullet points in each one of these session areas from the workshop takeaways, right?
Oh yeah.
What are the topics that those bullet points were on this session? Were they like challenges? You're identifying challenges? Are they solutions? Are they recommendations?
Well, yeah, I think I just tell some of the things that were covered, including tackling the data quality,
Right.
as well as Sarah talked about with the future of the workforce. Kind of looking at some bullet points and what agencies are doing that they've done to help manage the workforce changes that are coming.
Examples in the workshop from the participants of what they're doing to respond to the challenges that were identified
Correct.
in the workshop.
Yeah.
So it's both like a challenges and a recommendation session.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
Right. And some of it actually is a little bit of a wish list too. Some agencies talked about like, it'd be great. We don't have plans for it, but we'd love a CRO.
So
right?
recommendations
Right.
too.
So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Challenges, what people are doing right now, and then recommendations for future action.
Right.
Good.
Right.
So just one thing I'll plug here. So I actually had a podcast recorded last week with the CRO for Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency.
Hey.
CRA, that's right. So because he was at the AFERM summit last year too. So something they mentioned that I thought was really interesting is that they basically see themselves as ERM consultants to their agency, just like you said, Sarah. I thought that was a great way to look at it, because they say, we're only so big, we're gonna have maybe 4 or 5 people at the high level for the whole agency, but we deploy our folks down to the the sub offices there and consult with them, help them figure out how to do their own ERM assessments and programs and profiles, and then that helps the whole, that's for the good of the whole agency. So I think that would be, I'm sure some federal agencies are already doing this, but I think that would be a great model to follow. So
I think that's a great point. I think if effective use of people in that role as consultants can really help, because the whole intent here is to help an agency, and it should not be the gotcha type of approach to
Right.
this, and so that's why viewing those ERM professionals as consultants can help an organization realize the benefits of the program.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we hit on session number 3? We'll give Thomas here a chance. So this again was part about the organization's culture, and I think one of the things that we talked about here was, why did organizations feel that the culture itself was integral to a successful program?
Yeah, right. So, the culture is really the attitudes and behaviors that come across every day through the interactions employees have, the decisions that leadership and others make. So all of these things have a major impact on how well the organization is able to manage risk and pursue its mission and vision. So you can have the best risk assessment process, you can have the most advanced EGRC tool, but at the end of the day, that's not going to be enough if people aren't comfortable raising risks, discussing risks, and if the leadership and others aren't making decisions and behaving in a way that really aligns with the core values of the organization. So that's really why culture is really so integral to ERM.
Yeah, from folks we've talked to on here, if you didn't really have that strong, enthusiastic support at all levels, or especially high levels, things just don't happen. They don't, folks have tried to stand up programs and they just don't work. The culture is like super important with that.
Yeah.
Now, so speaking of that, what did participants say were some ways they could build, this culture up and, mature it, get people involved, measure the how this culture, measure where it is.
Yeah. So a lot of the discussion focused on, before you can influence culture, you really have to understand it. So to do this, some agencies are conducting surveys. Some of them are actually using existing surveys that are already in place, such as the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey.
Sure, the FEVs, yeah.
Yeah. So there are several questions on that survey that can be informative about an organization's attitude towards risk. Actually, a couple of years ago, some agencies got together and developed an index to measure and track this, similar to how, there's that employee engagement index. So the surveys are often followed up with more targeted discussions or focus groups. And then some organizations even review decisions that have been made specifically through the lens of, did this decision reflect our core values and align with our mission and vision?
Right.
But ultimately, the key to all of this is tracking results over time and reporting on the results and implementing actions to actually affect cultural change where appropriate. So really, reporting on culture is just as important as measuring it.
Makes sense. All right, I think Tal's itching to ask a question. What you got there?
Well, just from the workshop, and like I said, there's a lot of summary. What are one of the highlights in terms of when they say either do an assessment or then trying to influence the culture? What would be like some of the highlight areas that from that discussion were some of the more prominent points?
Yeah, so I think, do you mean in terms of what they get out of that?
What cultural aspects are lead to greater success within the agencies versus what cultural aspects might be great impediments to the implementation of an effective ERM program that really adds value to agency performance and strategies.
Got it. Yeah. So earlier, I think somebody mentioned tone from the top, and that really kept coming up as being critical. But they also talked about tone at the middle, because that's just as important. And making sure that there are regular communications at multiple levels that are kind of reinforcing the core values and the behaviors that are expected of the organization. And also making sure that employees are engaged, because if you're not engaged and you're not really truly invested in the work that you're doing, then you're less likely to do what you need to do to help the organization meet its mission, including better manage risk.
Yeah, I would assume a lot of it would just lead by example too. You got these senior leaders that really are into this program, and they, there's communications. You see them as a good example of how you should act.
Yeah.
So how thick is this white paper report from 2019? What sort of strenuous read are we proposing to our listeners?
Yeah, it's about 200 pages, and that plus multiple appendices. No, I'm just kidding. It's about 8 or 9 pages, and some of that is actually introduction and table of contents.
So it's a medium-sized cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And what would you score it on the entertainment and enjoyment level?
I think it's engaging, Tal. I think I would look at it, because there are so many practical items that have been that surfaced, especially during the tabletop discussion groups that we had, that are incorporated in here. I think you can really, as a reader, if you're involved in risk management, you can relate to some of the concepts that are brought out. If you're not involved in risk management within an organization, you can read it and say, oh, these are some of the things that I need to understand, or I now understand why the agency is communicating certain things to me because of what was covered in the content.
When I did my read, on one hand, as just the good old reader who's involved as a practitioner, I said, oh, there's others out there. Because when he saw the challenges and the obstacles, a lot of it's going to resonate. And then when they see the steps that people are engaged in terms of the managements that we're working with, saying, the reason why we're recommending these steps is these other folks are doing it and getting success by these steps. And then the same recommendations when we're trying to lay out a path for the maturation of the program, just from the workshop, and say, look, these are not isolated ideas from this staff here. This is what the community is discussing as the right path to move forward. So I found a lot of kindred spirit and comments in there that was useful for both my own understanding and to share it with staff, and then to share it with the programs that we're working with. Because when they read it, like it's a cup of coffee. It's a pretty easy read, and yet it covers a lot of important ground. So my applause to everybody that was at the workshop that put it together, because I think the report's a great resource.
Absolutely. And now we can plug the one coming up. And actually, I just realized this was an AGA. Well, I didn't just realize it's an AGA AFERM combined, thing here. So I think we have 2 podcasts in one. I can publish 2. How about that? Save me some time.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So why don't you guys give us a little bit of sneak peek into what we should expect this year at the workshop?
Do they already have the topics?
We do have the topics. Yeah. So as Thomas mentioned, The workshop is scheduled for April 29th, 2020. So it's coming right up here. We have 3 topics. So the first one is more on integrating the risk management functions throughout the organization. So how can an organization take these risks and integrate? And so we feel that takes off from this white paper and the last session, and talking a little bit more about the maturation of the ERM process. Yeah. Another topic that we're going to have is hearing from the IG offices. So the Inspector Generals play an important role in this, and learning how the Inspector General's offices and the CROs can work together to enhance the practice of ERM within the agency. So it's getting beyond this fear tactic, or the fear of, what is the IG going to do if they see my ERM program.
A quick intersection. We, if you look back a couple of risk chats, we had Robert Westbrook from IG at PBGC, who leads the SIGI group on the standards for assessing and interacting between the IGs and the agency. So that should be a topic, because now when that rolls out, the IGs should be ready to engage in a more standardized, directed format with audits, evaluations, oversight of agency ERM programs. Sorry to interrupt.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's great to hear. And then the third area is operationally looking at the risk appetite. So how do we operationalize that particular approach to managing the risk and looking at it at all levels of the organization? So I think really exciting topics coming up. Thomas, Sarah, anything to add?
No, I just encourage everyone to register for the next event.
Yeah, and these are very timely. We literally just had another podcast about the topic number 3 right there. So this is all right on top of everybody's mind. And again, we encourage everybody to go. And thanks again for another good chat here, everybody.
That's our show. Thanks for tuning in. And make sure to attend that upcoming AGA AFERM Summit. Another wonderful one coming up here in April. So I hope you have the chance to check it out. And of course, all our other podcasts on AGA and AFERM's websites. So until next time, this is your host, Paul Marshall, signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.